Hey folks, in this episode of the Light Artist Podcast, I get to sit down with Tim Salikhov. He is a collector and a curator in the NFT space. Hey folks, welcome back to another episode of the Light Artist Podcast. I'm your host, Frederick Van Johnson. Tim Salikhov is joining us today to dive deep into the NFT space from a collector and a curator standpoint. We've got some really interesting things to talk about and a little bit of time to do it. So we're going to dive in and just kind of pick this guy's brain about, how do you become successful in this space? What are some of the issues that he dealt with getting to where he is in the space? Some of the projects he's working on now? All that good stuff we're going to reveal in the next 30 minutes or so. So Tim, welcome to the podcast. How are you doing?
Frederick, amazing to sit down with you.
It's amazing to sit down with you. Thank you for taking the time to do this. This is going to be a great discussion. You and I were chatting offline just before I started recording, and just, this interview could very easily be 5 hours long. There's just so much to talk about. But let's start with
a reason to talk NFTs, photography, art. Yeah, I'll be here all day.
I love it. Well, let's just scrape the surface of that a little bit. Then let's start with some background on who Tim Salikhov is. Like, what's the elevator pitch if you're at a cocktail party and someone says, "Hey, what do you do?" How do you respond to them?
Man, I haven't done this in a while.
Yeah, right.
In at least 8 years. I come from the investment world. I first was in public equities. Then I did private equity and VC, which eventually led me to join a couple of startups and help them with things such as business development, strategy, partnerships. And at the same time, I was spending more and more time on crypto and specifically NFTs and Web3. And eventually that began to play a much bigger role in my life. I was spending nights and weekends exploring latest innovations and learning about art, building relationships, making friends, and just became very, very hard to ignore. And it took a little bit of time, but eventually I decided to give it my full attention. So as of last week, I am full-time in crypto.
Wow, look at that. You're the first one. The first discussion that I've had with somebody that is full-time in the space. So suffice it to say, you're bullish on the space, and it's you're leaning forward on this. I want to talk about that a little bit, just the NFTs, well, a lot, right? So the NFT space overall, there's been a lot of controversy back and forth around its viability. Is it realistic for people to jump into it? It's, for a lot of people, it's confusing, and there's a lot of sort of landmines in there to step on, but then there's a big pot of gold in there too, if people understand it. Can you talk about, from your perspective as a curator and a collector, your overall sentiment of the market in general? Is it here to stay? Should people approach it with caution, for kind of the new or semi-new people that are looking at the space?
I'm an optimist by nature, and I used to be in the space taking risks, both as an investor and as a startup operator. And so from that perspective, I have a very high risk tolerance, and crypto seemed like a no-brainer from that perspective. I've also seen how this amazing technology can empower people and communities and amazing teams building great things. And that's what I want to get behind. And we only have one shot at this life, and I intend not to waste a second.
Absolutely. Well, you sound like me. I feel like I'm talking to... That's exactly what I say. Tim, what about Web3, right? So we hear, especially from Facebook and all these other gazillion-dollar ventures out there pouring money into different facets of Web3, but very few people can articulate exactly what Web3 is. What do you think, from your perspective and from things that you're working on? What is this Web3 thing that people are talking about?
The way I perceive Web3 is the internet that you can own. And it's the technology that creates much better alignment among various stakeholders, whether it's creators, whether it's communities, whether it's their audiences or partners or someone else. And as a result, those who bet early or who are actively supporting others may be rewarded in the long run. And that's the idea.
Yeah, yeah, I love it. Yeah, that's a really good, succinct way to kind of position it. I'm like you. I'm very optimistic on this space, but I'm also a very science fiction oriented person that sees this, the utopian future. I'm a more of a Star Trek type person versus a Walking Dead type person. Right? I want to see where humanity can go. And one of the places, and obviously the blockchain, NFTs, crypto, Web3, all these things collectively and separately are powering that kind of utopian futuristic vision. When I looked at your bio that you shared with me prior to this interview, 0 to 50 million, 2 years. Look, we got to talk about that. We got to talk about that. So explain that. Explain, what does that mean? 0 to 50 million in 2 years. Did you do that? Is that collectively? What does 0 to 50 million mean?
Oh, $50 million. That's the total value of all photography on the blockchain at the moment.
Yeah.
And that's based on the recent prices with the one-on-one work, and that's based on the floor prices for the collections and editions. And as a result, in total, the whole space is currently worth somewhere around $50 million. It's an impressive number. It's also down from 400 million as of April, when we had the peak of the market, and also when Ethereum was over $3,000. So we've gone a little bit down, but at the same time, it's still a substantial result for the industry that didn't even exist 2 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah. And what do you think about that? Right. So that contraction, is that just sort of is that the space breathing, and this is the exhale, and then we'll inhale again in a couple of months. So what's your, putting your optimistic hat on, what are your thoughts of where we'll be? We're in October of 2022 as we record this. What do you foresee for 2023 October or 24? What are you thinking?
I'm in this space for the long term. And as a former investor, in hindsight, it's very difficult to make such precise predictions of what the market is going to be in a year or 2 years or 3 years, or let alone 5 years and so on. And so I'm not sure where we're headed. We can go lower, or this could be the bottom. I don't know. That said, it depends on your conviction in the space. There is always a great opportunity to pick up amazing artwork or bet on amazing creators if you can afford it. And that's how I see the situation right now. What I'm seeing is a significant number of collectors and investors are betting even bigger on some of the most established artists in the space. And in the last 4 months, while the photography category as a whole has shrunk, the premium one-on-one work on super rare, for example, stayed almost exactly the same in dollar terms, which means that in ETH terms, it's actually up at least 2.5x.
Yeah. Wow. What a great
That tells
space.
you a lot about the convictions that some people have.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. Some of the interviews I've had even on this podcast, some of the conversations I've had with artists, and it's been from, it spanned the range from successful artists down to people that are just sort of beginning and struggling at the beginning to get traction. One of the artists I just spoke to was in that latter group, sort of struggling to get traction and feeling, maybe a little bit disheartened about the space, because I think the way that they positioned it was they felt like that they were in a mall and they were waving their hands to get people like you or curators or collectors to see their work, but they were not being successful because all the attention was going in other directions. Are you seeing those kind of patterns in the space? And if so, how do those newer photographers or artists that are trying and struggling, waving their hands to get attention, how do they get attention from folks like you that are potential investors and purchasers and curators for larger collections?
Unfortunately, I do see that pattern, and it's not only in photography; it's across every category within Web3, whether it's generative art, crypto art, photography, or membership societies, and so on and so forth. And I can understand why. There is a lot of fear in this space, And as a result, the collectors feel a lot more comfortable betting on someone who's been in the space for a while, and they've seen them build in the down market and the up market. And as a result, they have higher conviction in them, and primarily in their longevity and in their commitment to the long term. While the newer creators or the emerging creators or those who haven't gotten as much traction, they have a little bit more to prove. That said, there are also collectors who are actively looking for these emerging artists and actively betting on them. This was especially pronounced last week, actually. Even though photography sales continues to trend down, we've seen a lot more artists make sales over the last week. So I'll give it for you. For instance, last week there were at least 20 photographers who sold more than one ETH worth of work last week, and that's up from 12 artists who sold more than one ETH worth of work the week before. So there is more and more appetite for artists outside of the top 10, outside of the top 20.
So do you think that's growing? Is that a trend, or are we, long term, if you zoom out and look at the Tim view, right? Long term, let's call it 10 years, that's a blip, right? Or are we seeing a trend line that's going to go up and to the right for a while?
It's too early to call it a trend. Mm-hmm. And also up and to the right, well, most things, like if you're an optimist, they tend to trend up and to the right, whether it's economy growth or successful company growth and so on and so forth. And so for the space as a whole, photography or any other category within Web3 is going to be bigger. Then the question becomes who participates in that growth. And there are certain things which are encouraging, and there are certain things which are concerning. And encouraging things, there are more and more creators entering the space. So that's incredible. There are more collectors entering the space. So those are good news. A few things that we are yet to see is for those incremental dollars to trickle down to the more emerging artists. So as of today, the top 100 photographers in the space have accounted for almost 80% of sales. That's an insane concentration in the space, which is on the 50 million, which is under the size of 15 million. And so in the long run, the question becomes, is it still going to be the same 100 artists accruing most of those dollars? Or are those incremental dollars going to flow to the newer creators, and as a result, we will see fragmentation of the market? And I would love for that to be the latter, but as of right now, it's too early to tell.
Yeah, no, for sure. And then that 100 creators or 100 photographers, out of roughly how many are we talking?
There are roughly 1,000 photographers who have sold at least one NFT.
Okay.
In the last 2 years.
Okay. Wow. So how, from putting on your curation hat or even your collector hat, these artists that are creating these amazing works, but are, kind of like the tree in the forest. If it falls and no one sees it, does it make a sound, or does it generate a sale? Probably not, right? So how do those photographers get on your radar? In other words, the people that are outside of that 100, how do they, and they're waving their hands in the mall, what are some ways that those folks can get noticed? Or is it just time and diligence and staying visible within the space? What are your thoughts on that?
It's both, right? I put in the effort, and in the same way that those artists also put in their effort. So the majority of the artists who enter the space, they I see many of them share about their stories, share about their art and artistic process, and they come on Twitter, they join Discord groups, and they talk about their art. They talk about what their art represents, where they come from, and that's an amazing start. And that's typically how they come on the radar of collectors and curators, such as myself, and that's how I tend to discover them. And the more connections and friendships they build, the easier it would be for folks like me to discover them, because their posts and photos and art will be reshared, retweeted, and as a result, there will be more eyeballs on their work.
So what does that look like though in terms of, is it participating in a bunch of Discord conversations? Is it tweeting? Is it, engaging or maybe even starting Twitter Spaces? Like, how do those artists start and engage in the conversations in order to get visible and on, say, your radar?
There is no one. All of those things that you mentioned, those are viable paths.
Yeah.
They are. It doesn't necessarily mean that artists need to pursue all of them, nor does it mean that there's a certain amount of hours in the day that they need to be on Discord or Twitter. It's totally up to them. And if they don't feel like sharing, if they don't feel like being active, and like if they don't feel comfortable talking about their work, promoting their work, that's totally fine. Sometimes you get to discover new art through another artist that you already know. Sometimes they would point to some of their fellow peers and with whom they connected in private, for example. And those things happen as well.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so interesting. It feels very much like like the I don't know, in the US, the old West, right? Where it's full of potential, full of danger, full of speculation,
Yeah.
all the things, but it's still, it's leading to California and Los Angeles and San Francisco. That's in the future for NFT, but right now we're just kind of foraging out and figuring out what the infrastructure is going to look like. And that's yeah, and like you said, those people, like even in the settler days here, on the West Coast, even in those days, it required a high level of optimism and other things in order to make your way and kind of get into that space. Same here with NFTs and Web3 and crypto, right? You have to you have to have a combination of the ability, i.e. funding or disposable income, in order to dive into it if you're going to be an investor or a collector or a curator. But as a creator, that risk is going to be there, and you may or may not, likely may, lose some money as you walk down that road of getting, or building your understanding of the space. So yeah, so optimism, right? Optimism is key here.
Optimism is key here, and commitment is key. And
Yeah.
It's also uh, what I like about this space is that it rewards your persistence and your hard work and how much you put yourself out there. It's also a lot cheaper and easier to create your work and put it on the blockchain. For example, a year ago, creators they had to invest their own money up front, and they would to put their work on the blockchain. They shared at least 15% with the platforms on which they listed their work. And as a result, it wasn't as lucrative. Like there was a certain break-even point. Like the break-even point for them was significantly higher than it is today. Today, it's so much cheaper. It's easier to stand up your own smart contract. You don't need to depend on any platform. And I find this empowering. I find this that if you trust yourself and your abilities, you will do just fine. And all these opportunities will be created through your own efforts.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's fair.
I look at this space and I think there's some analogs to or direct parallels to the or many other spaces, but podcasting, right? So back in the day, it was really, it's never been crazy difficult to start and run a podcast, but it was much more challenging, let's say 5 years ago. Today, you could probably do it from your phone, maybe even your watch, right? You can create these amazing shows, and the tools have matured to the point where it doesn't require a whole lot of technical ability or revenue or whatever to start your show. Are you seeing the same kind of pattern in the crypto space or in the NFT space? And should photographers or creatives, is it a waiting game? In other words, should photographers say, you know what, these tools are too non-refined right now, and I feel like I'm gonna wait for another 2 years for tools to mature to the point where it's easy. Should they do that, or will the bus have left the station by then if they wait? Should they jump in now while the tools are still kind of, not primitive but not fully fleshed out, or should they wait until things are a little bit more mainstream?
I think it really depends on what their aspirations are.
Yeah.
For instance, if the aspiration is to sell their work on the blockchain, that's becoming more and more difficult, obviously, because the space is getting more crowded, and as a result, like there is only finite amount of attention that you can get. While if you have different intentions, then there may be much better opportunities down the line. You see a lot of mainstream brands and traditional companies embrace Web3 and create more opportunities for their creators. Take Meta, for example. They have 1 billion people on Instagram, and out of those, at least 30 million creators. And Meta is going to make it so much easier for those creators to stand up their NFT collections or launch an NFT, and it's going to be super simple for them. The flip side of that may be that it won't accrue as much value, for example, as the one-on-one work that you might publish on Super Rare, for example. And so, but those two different types of NFTs will serve different purposes. So really, it depends on what that creator aspires to do.
Yeah, it's like everything, right? Let's switch gears, Tim, and talk a little bit about just sort of the mainstream perception of the space, the NFT space in particular. We talked a little bit about this before we started recording, but there's multiple camps, but two main camps. There's people that are bullish and people that are bearish. People that are optimistic about the space are like you and I. We kind of feel like we know where it's going and it's amazing, it's exciting, it's empowering, etc. And the other side of the fence are the people that are like, what the heck is this? It's who out there can spare $1 million for 3 pixels, right? We've all heard the arguments and the naysayers and all that. What is your response to that, right? Because we're kind of at the split of, is it mainstream yet? And if so, has it already gone mainstream, and that representation of NFT in the mainstream space is that they tried it and they've poo-pooed it, right? Or have they just not seen the light yet? What are your thoughts?
I don't think we've gone mainstream yet. We haven't even captured mainstream attention yet, and let alone mainstream understanding, because as you pointed out, the majority of articles and headlines that we see, they tend to make fun of the space, and they tend to point to some craziness happening in the space. And I very rarely see media and people in the traditional space celebrate some of the wins that we've had. Like, for example, photography has been to major auction houses such as Christie's and Sotheby's multiple times. Works of such creators as Justin Aversano and Drift, they have been exhibited alongside works of some of the most iconic photographers, such as Ansel Adams, for example. And Justin Aversano's Twin Flames fetched over $1 million last year. Those are incredible results, both for him personally, but most importantly for the space. Shining light on the space and demonstrating that photography on the blockchain is here to stay. And so that's one piece. Another piece is we've seen a significant number of marquee photographers enter Web3. And one of the most amazing galleries doing this great work is Fellowship, for example. Since they were founded, they onboarded over 10 most iconic photographers into the space, including Gregory Crutzen and Guy Bourdin and many others. And those works were picked up in minutes by some of the most prominent collectors in the space. And those are just a handful of examples. I can go on more, on and on and on. Same with the individual collectors. We are seeing people such as Kevin Rose and Gary Vee and many others in the space invest very heavily into photography. And that's an amazing vote of confidence.
Yeah, I think it's a vote of confidence as well from someone like you. I mean, like you said in your bio, 15 years in equities, VC, startups, etc. So clearly, you're not. I mean, it's speculative, right? But you're coming from a position of authority and intelligence. It's not just, hey, this thing looks, it's a shiny new thing. I'm gonna, throw my time and effort behind it. So and like you mentioned, names like Gary Vee and Kevin Rose, all these people that are diving in, they've already made their fortunes and are continuing to make more fortunes, are betting big on this space. So that's a legitimizing factor. But here's the other piece of that. When we say mainstream and we talk about it, has it gone mainstream? Is it going mainstream? Let's put a finer point on what mainstream is. Is mainstream?
That's a good idea. Let's do that.
Yeah. Let's define that. What do you think mainstream is?
I'll open up with the stats.
Yeah.
An NFT photograph has been collected by, at least one, has been collected by 3,000 people as of this moment. 3,000 people. And let's put that in the context. I believe that the number of monthly active users of MetaMask is somewhere around 500,000. I believe that there are 5 million Ledger wallets. And I think that roughly 3 million people have bought their NFTs. So this means that 0.1% of people who have bought an NFT have bought a photograph. And then 3 million people who have bought an NFT, that's less than 0.1% of all the people in the world.
Wow.
This is so far away from mainstream, isn't it?
Yeah, that smells like opportunity to me.
I think so too.
Yeah.
I also think that when we say opportunity, it's very important to define for ourselves what it means. Many people, when they think of Web3, think of opportunities as money. And that was the phase one of NFTs, I believe. And that's what most of the headlines captured. That's what brought the first wave of people. I don't think this is sustainable. And I believe that for us to expand the space and onboard the next 100 million people and invite more collectors into the space, we need to shift the conversation away from making money and toward something else.
Yeah. There's so many different conversations to have in this because it's much like many things in the art space, right? It's completely subjective or subjective in a lot of ways. So, and it depends. There's 100%. A lot of depends in there. Yeah, there's a lot of depends in there. Depends on what your goals are. Are you approaching this because, hey, I saw so-and-so made a bunch of money, so I want to do that. I'm a better artist than they are, so I want to make money and do that. Or I'm in it just to increase the footprint of people that can be exposed to my art. And this space represents a way for me to share my creative vision further with some securities around it. And I wanted to talk a little bit about your process in curation, right? You're a curator, and it's speaking to creators, right, that have this opportunity to speak to a creator or a curator and a collector, someone who they aspire to hopefully one day buy their work. What are the things that you look for when you're curating or looking at a piece for potentially collecting? Is it, you're looking at its track record or the artist's track record? Are you looking at the piece purely from an aesthetic standpoint? It speaks to me, therefore I'm going to buy it. What are the factors that go into the curation process for you?
Of course. I'm a visual person, as I believe everyone is. And so aesthetics play a huge role, obviously. It captures my attention. And that also triggers my curiosity. I want to learn who created this piece of art and why they did that. So I dive into the artist story and their creative process. And I enjoy learning what they were up to before Web3. And what brought them into the space. So those questions are important to me personally. And then it's the commitment to the space also matters to me. And commitment to the space, I mean, do they collect other people's work? Are they part of any communities? And for how long have they been doing that? Are they doing so consistently? Are they putting themselves out there? So those are also the questions that I ask myself. Then I go down the funnel and I look at things such as provenance. Who else collected their work? Has it been exhibited at various galleries or events? And also, are those people doing something innovative? Are they propelling the space forward? Are they pushing the boundaries of what photography could be, the next generation of photography could be. And those are some of the things that I look at when I evaluate the artists and when I put my youth to work.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. Put the ETH to work. You know, the divide between the artists that are, let's say, you know, in areas of the world that aren't wealthy, right? That are still that are artists, and they're maybe in many cases better than artists that are in areas of the world that are wealthy. How do those artists kind of break into this space? Or are they, you know, by definition of the Web 3.0 architecture, are we kind of building a you know, kind of a moat that they have to get over in order to get seen and get on the radar of people, you know, of collectors and curators? Like, what? How do you see that? Is NFT and Web3 the great equalizer? You know, we're all on the same platform because we're all connected to the net, or does it raise a moat, like, you know, the analogy of the moat, where, you know, there are people inside that are thriving and there are people outside that want to jump over that moat to get in, but they don't have a way to get in. Like, what are your thoughts on that?
I think we in this space have done an incredible work over the last 2 years, creating that opportunity and
Yeah.
creating the market to begin with. And that's great. And I believe that we can do a better job celebrating that and giving each other credit for this amazing work that we've done. And there are 5 photographers who have grossed over $1 million each. There are 60 photographers who have grossed over $100,000 each. Those are incredible numbers, remarkable results. And I'm incredibly happy for those artists, because I've also seen those artists allocate a lot of those funds toward buying other photographers' work, other
Yeah.
artists' work. And that's incredible. I absolutely love seeing that. And that creates more opportunities for the next wave of creators. And as I said in the beginning, we have at least 1,000 photographers who have sold at least one work. That's a great result. Yes, 1,000 photographers is a drop in the bucket. And also the majority of sales accruing to the top 100 artists, that's a problem. And going forward, those are the things that we can solve. We can do a better job shining light on some of the underrepresented photographers from minority communities, photographers from countries where they don't speak English, or from countries where there aren't many collectors. And there are so many things that are yet to be resolved. And we are seeing an increasing number of communities and artists talk about this and share about this. And there's so much that we can do as a community and also individually to make sure that we empower more creators and we make it an empowering space for more people.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. You know, one of the questions that or areas that I wanted to dive into are just the outside forces outside of NFT, outside of crypto, Web3, that potentially could affect the space. Like, and do they affect the space? For example, you know, all the turmoil that's happening in Europe right now, or the economy in the US, or the economy in Europe, right? So all the different things that are happening around the world and the uncertainty that we're living in, do those factors impact NFTs, you know, or the crypto space? Are those factors what's kind of driving the volatility in the space? Like, from your perspective, what do you think?
I think they are impacting the space 100%. And on the one hand, there is a significant amount of dry powder. And if we look at the space as a whole, not just photography or art, just the broader crypto Web3 space, there's at least $5 billion of dry powder sitting just in the US alone, like with VC funds. And that's an incredible amount. And I'm seeing an almost steady number of deals being closed. And I'm seeing people push through. I'm seeing more and more companies and startups in this space hire people. So those things are exciting, and they definitely bring hope. That said, the space as a whole. So in photography, we've seen roughly $15 million worth of sales in the last 2 years. I'm not sure what it is for the broader art. Let's call it, if photography is somewhere around 5% of the total art market, let's call it $1 billion worth of sales in the last 2 years. That's a really small number. And for us to grow the space, whether it's 5x, 10x, 20x, we need outside capital, and we need capital from the traditional institutions, from institutional investors, from family offices, from high net worth individuals. And those people think like investors. And for them, it's an alternative asset class. It's also a misunderstood asset class, a risky asset class. And they are not ready to pull the trigger yet, especially in the current environment where almost every asset class has brought losses to the people this year. Every asset class is challenged. And the outlook is difficult as well, at least over the next, whether it's 6 to 18 months.
Yeah.
And so in this context, crypto and Web3 is probably going to be at the end of the line for those investors. And I'm also seeing that from my own conversations with these funds, because I used to be in the private equity and the VC world, and I have maintained relationships with my former colleagues and investors. And we having these conversations, I was very close to raising a fund, and I eventually realized that for me to fulfill my ambitions, there needs to be a better timing. And I'm hearing very similar stories from other builders in the space, with a few exceptions, obviously.
Yeah, no, of course. Are you in, I'm sure you don't know all investors or all VC funds, right? But for the group that you're in touch with and that what's the sentiment overall of this space? Is it caution, or are they optimistic like yourself, or what's the general feel?
Those who have, generally those investors who are already present in the space, that is, they've made at least one investment or they've raised funds dedicated to crypto, those investors are obviously doubling down on the space. Yeah. And they are also, this time is also an amazing, this period is also an amazing time for them to back some of the most amazing and strongest teams in this space, some of the most amazing artists in this space. And also the space is already demonstrating who is here to stay and who was here for their own intentions. And so for investors, it's actually been, to an extent, easier to make investments and to filter through all the noise that we had a year ago.
Yeah. Yeah, just like anything else, right? As time marches on, things get easier and more information
100%.
comes out. Yeah.
100%. It may not be easy to pull the trigger for some people, obviously, right? Because when we see volumes going down, sales going down, people leaving the space, and a lot more negativity in the space, then how do you know that we've reached the bottom? How do you know that this is not going to zero? And I don't have answers to those questions. Like, we may be going to zero. I mean, that is a non-zero probability, right? That said, it's also a very insignificant probability, and see an amazing risk reward from these levels. And so from that perspective, I am, when it comes to my crypto portfolio, I'm dollar cost averaging. When it comes to NFTs, I'm always on the lookout for the amazing opportunities, whether it's Web3 communities or the art that I've been eyeing for a while.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the thing, right? Just like anything else in life, there are no guarantees, and people looking to get into this space, looking for a guarantee, like you said, it's a non-zero chance that they may lose everything, but there's also a non-zero chance that they may be wildly successful. So yeah, they're
100%.
Yeah, no guarantees in anything. I'm as we wrap this up, I'm curious about some of the issues that face both you as a curator collector and for other people that are looking to get into the space, maybe from an artist standpoint. having been in the space and having been successful in this space, to date, what are some of the issues or landmines that people that are looking to dive into this space, what should they be aware of where things might go, where things are going, turn left here instead of right, what are your thoughts or guidance on that?
If I were an artist entering this space or building my own brand in this space, I think that there hasn't been a better time to do this. And the reason I'm saying that is because there are fewer artists who are here for the right reasons. And if you're curious about the space, if you're excited about technologies, if you are excited about evolving your art and seeing what else you can do with all of those crazy ideas that you have in your head, there is no better time. And if you're here to make friends and build relationships, those are the things that I would be focused on. And now there are so many incredible tools, NFT native, Web3 native tools to do that, whether it's additions or airdrops or some other dynamics that you can experiment with. I would definitely be doing that. And if you're having fun, if you are putting yourself out there consistently, then the attention of the collectors and the money will come.
Yeah, love it.
That I have no doubt about.
Yeah, it's stay with it, just like anything else, right? Like when we were kids, trying to use a magnifying glass to burn a hole in a leaf, right? You got to focus on one point before you can make a hole or burn it or do damage into one focus point. If you're not doing that and you're spreading out the energy too much, you're just gonna not have any effect and warm the thing.
100%. Right? And I'll give you an example. Like for instance, I try to do my best to discover new art and new artists and learn about them. And I am learning at least about 10, 15 new artists every week. And then I'm asking those artists about some of the artists that they look up to or they find exciting and someone who's doing amazing creative things. And all of us can do this individually. The flip side of this is also when I put myself out there and when I share about some of the art that excites me, or when I share some of the stats or some of the sales that took place in the last week. For every encouraging comment, I also get a number of those who ask me, how come you missed my art? How come you didn't write about me? How come you don't spend more time covering this artist or that artist and this thing? And all of those things are true. I'm just one person. And the same logic applies to all the other collectors. We're all people at the end of the day. We're excited about the space, but we only have 24 hours in the space and in the day. And so being understanding, and also instead of attacking others, you can help them and just be a little bit friendlier and be more proactive and share about the art as opposed to get on the defensive, which I see a lot in this space.
Right, and that goes towards your, like you said, your original motivations for getting into the space. So if your goal is just revenue, I'm gonna become a photographer because I heard about this NFT stuff. I'm gonna become a photographer. I'm gonna build this collection of NFTs, and I'm gonna buy a house in Malibu, California from the proceeds in 2024. If that's your goal. Probably not going to happen, right? But, I forget the book that I read recently, but one of the passages in there was one of the author's secrets to success was, instead of looking for ways to help himself, he was looking for ways that he could help other people. And he would lead conversations with, how can I help you? How can I use my assets, or my reach or whatever to help you towards your goals, and making the statement altruistically, right? Instead of
100%.
Right. And then it always kind of circles and eventually comes back. You feel the same way?
I feel 100% the same way. We all have something to share, something to give. And there is no better gift than creating opportunities for others.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's leave it right there. Tim, what's next on your horizon? What are some of the projects that you have coming up? And then also, if people want to connect with you and follow you online, I know you're doing Twitter Spaces and all that magic. Where should people go to get more Tim?
I am very active on Twitter, and I'm at T Salikhov. Feel free to DM me, reach out, comment on my posts, and I read all of them. And I am incredibly grateful for this opportunity to continue to connect with the people in the space, whether you're just curious, whether you have a question, whether you think that I can be helpful. Please, my DMs are open.
Awesome. All right, Tim Salikhov, thank you so much for coming on. We'll leave it right there. You have a good rest of your day and your trip. I know you're in a hotel right now, so have a good rest of your trip and travel safe.
Thanks so much. I had a great time. Thanks so much, Frederick.
You're welcome. Take care.